What makes Corviknight so good?
Bon voyage.
Run for your life! I'll cover you!
God!
It's not exciting, it's not thrilling, and it's not sexy, but if two Pokemon are the face of Sword and Shield competitive singles right now, it has gotta be Clefable and Corviknight. For those who already watched my Clefable video, the former might not be much of a surprise to you. I mean, this thing's been running the show and overused for so long. But Corviknight is new beans, and taking a quick look at its stats doesn't really seem that impressive. All pretty average across the board, plus there's its ability, which isn't really much to speak of. I mean, come on, it's a starting route bird. We all know these things suck. And hell, I'll fess up. When I first saw this thing leaked leading up to Sword and Shield's release, I'll admit that I completely slept on it and really did not expect it to be that good. But here I am, 5 months later, making a damn video dedicated to the thing, so I guess I got the last laugh. First things first, sort of similar to what I said with Clefable, but if we're talking about what makes Corviknight good, the typing definitely bears mention. For starters, there's Steel, which is, in my opinion, the best typing in Pokemon. It resists 10 of the total 18 typings in the game, in addition to being immune to poison type moves, and is only weak to fire, fighting, and ground types. So right at the gates, Steel is an amazing typing for Corviknight to have, and historically speaking, any Steel types that can add on an additional immunity to one of those weaknesses I mentioned has gone on to become an amazing Pokemon. Steel Flying is no exception. Flying grants an immunity to ground type moves, and adds resistance to the fighting type moves that would normally threaten Steel. On the other side, the Steel typing removes Flying's weaknesses to Ice and Rock. This all adds up to mean that Corviknight is only weak to Fire and Electric moves. And quick aside, this is a huge reason why Rotom Heat suddenly jumped up to overuse this generation. Its Fire and Electric typing makes it a rare offensive counter to Corviknight. Plus its own typing lets it wall Clefable, but it's not like it suddenly got a bunch of special attack and like this huge buff that made it overused. It just has a great matchup versus the bird. But yes, to get back on track, it's a fantastic typing. Even if we were to discard the synergy between Steel and Flying, it just really helps from a team building perspective. Because individually, Steel and Flying are two of the most important types to include when you're building a team. So being able to combine the two slots for just one Corviknight saves me a lot of room in my teams. And when you can actually combine that excellent defensive typing with some decent defensive stats, much like Skarmory or Celesteela have, all of a sudden you have an unkillable monster. Which neatly brings me to my next topic, which is its stats. I think it's easy when you're first looking at Corviknight to compare it to other elite defensive Pokemon and think that its stats really aren't all that hot. After all, most elite defensive Pokemon nowadays have like a staggering defense stat or like maybe a 200 something base HP, what have you. So someone like Corviknight coming along with its middle of the road stats might not seem that impressive as a result. But trust me, base 100 HP and defense are solid, and its special defense is definitely not letting anyone down either. Not only is this pretty much the exact same stats as defensive staples like Mew, Celebi, and Jirachi, but even if you were to contrast these stats against the big boys, it stands up better than you might think. So to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to stop and compare the damage Corviknight takes from a neutral move like Bisharp's knockoff with some other defensive tanks in the overused tier, because you might be surprised by how well it holds up. Pretty good, right? It's also important to note that very few of these Pokemon have a typing quite as good as Corviknight's either. Hell, while we're talking about stats, its attacking stats are pretty good too. It's got a base 67 speed, which lets it get the jump on the other base 60s that are so common and overused. And its attack, sitting pretty at 87, is honestly really good for a defensive wall like this. If you add in great stab attacking moves like Iron Head and Brave Bird, and they can dish out very respectable damage. Hell, you can even throw in Body Press for additional coverage, which pairs with its defenses nicely. Actually, talking about its move pool is a good segue for the best part about Corviknight. If you watched my Clefable video already, you might get a bit of deja vu here, but its roll compression is the real star here. Corviknight's not only got that great attack pool I mentioned, but it's also got Taunt, Roost, U-Turn, Tailwind, and of course, it's probably the best defogger in the tier. All of these tools, plus its amazing defensive advantages I mentioned earlier, turns Corviknight into one of the best defensive pivots in the game. To the point where every time I play a game without one of these things on my team, it feels like there's a hole on my team. Even more than Clefable, if I'm being honest. Actually, speaking of the different roles that Corviknight fills, this thing is also a really underrated sweeper. On top of everything else, Corviknight has access to some great setup moves, like Iron Defense and Bulk Up, that can quickly make this thing unkillable when you combine it with Roost. Or hey, if you want a set that's a little more evil and a little bit more cursed, might I recommend its Power Trip set. This one lets you get up agility too, and after a few boosts, not only are you extremely fast, tanky, and hard hitting, you've also got like a base 200 power dark type move that's obliterating the competition. The best part of all this is that you can use Corviknight as a defensive swap in all game without revealing your set to your opponent, kind of playing it careful and not revealing anything, and you crank one of these out in the end game. It's a really subtle win con, very much unlike a Cloyster or Dracovic, which you can see coming from like a mile away in team preview. Speaking of subtlety, the last point I want to bring up about Corviknight is a bit of a sleeper aspect to it that I've come to really appreciate recently. Its ability Pressure. Pressure doubles the amount of PP burned on moves used against you, which at first glance seems really minor, maybe even inconsequential. That is not the case, because this ability gives Corviknight an unprecedented advantage. It can ensure indefinitely that Stealth Rocks stay off the field versus any of the rockers in the game. So at first take, it's a bit hard to understand what exactly I mean by this, so let me explain. Normally there's this unspoken relationship in Pokemon where a Stealth Rocker should always kind of win versus a Defogger, because Stealth Rock has 32 PP and Defog has 24 PP. Theoretically, if both players are stubborn enough and they just keep staying in and keep spamming these moves, the Defogger will normally run out of PP first, and the Stealth Rocks will just have to stay up. But Corviknight's Pressure means that the Stealth Rocker burns through PP at double the rate, and they just can't keep mashing that button until you give up because they'll run out. In fact, a Corviknight can make you use Stealth Rock 16 times, make you run out of PP, and you'll still have 8 PP left over. This might sound like a really small change, but it's important because it subtly forces your opponent to make the first move in these standoffs, not you, and you can keep the rocks off the field. Normally something like Zapdos from the previous generation, who is another Defogger with access to Pressure, could do this too, but of course we've got to bring it back to its typing, because Zapdos can't swap in too frequently without taking Stealth Rock Chip or getting hit by a random Toxic, which Corviknight is immune to. And I'm actually going to expand on this point about Pressure a bit, because there's a surprising amount of end games in Sword and Shield that just end in like a PP stall war, you know, where I completely wall you, you completely wall me, and whoever runs out of PP first loses. And trust me, when these situations occur, there's no more valuable ability in the game than Pressure, of course. Pressure is going to make your opponent burn through PP twice as fast as you, and they're going to be using Struggle, cutting their own HP much faster than you too. And Corviknight puts the onus of avoiding these sort of dangerous endgames on your opponent, not you. And while I'm speaking of abilities, its unique one Mirror Armor is actually a really cool ability, and would definitely be much better if Landorus is still running around, but I've got to give it to Pressure currently. However, if Incineroar and Arcanine keep seeing expanded usage, because they're great offensive pivots that can come in on Corviknight in most cases, then it might be the case otherwise, because they can reflect their own Intimidate back at them, and that's got a lot of great utility. But I think that covers it. That went on a lot longer than I expected, but who can blame me? Because despite an unassuming first impression, Corviknight is a completely stacked Pokemon. This thing was probably bound to be overused no matter what with that typing and access to Defog, but its unexpectedly great stats, ability, move pool, and of course its synergy with Clefable have led to it becoming easily the second best Pokemon in the tier, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. But hey, if you're still here, I appreciate it, and if you haven't already, I'd ask that you consider liking this video or subscribing to the channel. Also, if you've got any ideas for something competitive Pokemon that you'd like to see explained, whether it's a concept, a move, a Pokemon, or something like team building, you can just let me know in the comments or hop into my Discord and ask me in person, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Regardless, thanks again for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. Take it easy.